this is a really important story to tell, and to understand this is particularly now, because as I was saying before, race is central to our story. Race, race, race. And a lot of people don't like that. And a lot of people don't want to hear about it.
Welcome to the end game. This is episode 31, and it's my pleasure to have on an old friend, John M. Gliona.
Hey, Tom. Hey, everybody.
And I know from my days, our days at the old San Diego Tribune, the bulletin board, the M stands for Millhouse.
As it used to. Yeah.
But anyways, John and I go back to the San Diego Tribune. Then John moved on to the Los Angeles Times. I went on to the merger with the San Diego Union Tribune. And now we're both writing books. My books are about how Michigan State has led college football integration behind Duffy Daugherty, and about how much of it is misunderstood by college football lore and the national media. They believe these myths about Bear Bryant, who was actually a foot dragger on college football integration. And John has a new book called No Friday Night Lights. John has also been honored, was it 2019 Best Sports Writing in America in 2000?
Yeah, there's a collection of books that comes out every year, and you guys may see it on the shelves at Best Sports Writing 224, Best Essays, and so it's collected. So one of my stories about traveling through the outback of Australia with a bunch of itinerant Aboriginal boxers was included in the 2019 version of that book. I was honored to hear that.
Yeah. And I won a first place award from the Football Writers Association, but I haven't yet made Best Sports Writing. So that's a great honor. John, let's talk about your book. This is not the first book about high school football, but it is about one from a lonely outpost, and it's very unique. Nobody has written a book as accurate about college football integration as mine, and very few, if anybody, could tackle the subject that you took on for your book, No Friday Night Lights. Tell us about the lonely outpost you were at and where you came up with the idea.
Well, one of the things that when I left the Los Angeles Times in 2015 in a buyout with a whole bunch of other reporters, I was a national correspondent. I lived in Las Vegas, but I covered the West. And I was always in my career, have always looked for sort of stories somewhere out there. And I like the idea of finding small, little forgotten places and writing about issues that are that are important even to we big city cats. And so I was after I left the Times, I was doing some freelancing for a newspaper in Las Vegas, the Review Journal, and I had offered my services just to go out into the ether of Nevada to these towns outside of Vegas and Reno and find stories to write. And so one of them was I was fascinated by the fact that Nevada was settled, by pretty much by the mining industry before the indigenous peoples, did their own settlements and was settled by white America. We came in looking for silver and gold, and mines opened up across Nevada, during the 1800s, and mines played out. And as the mines played out and closed down, communities that had sprouted up like, sagebrush in the middle of nothing kind of returned to the desert. And it's a common tale throughout Nevada where this has happened. And I was interested. I'm not a sports writer per se, but I love some of my, my favorite writers, Jim Murray from the from the LA Times, and your own stories, Tom. When we were both younger reporters, I liked how you went into high school football and told stories of these kids, real stories that didn't have to be professional athletes. They all had their own drama, they all their own personalities, and that's what you brought to the paper every day. And I wasn't a sports writer, but I realized there's a lot of stories to tell in the sports world, and I was particularly interested in finding a team out in Nevada where the community was in such peril of losing its population due to a mining closed down and diminishing, families moving out, that they really had to struggle year in, year out to populate sports teams, from girls volleyball to basketball to football. And I came across a little town on the border of Nevada and Oregon by the name of McDermott. And McDermott was named after a United States cavalry general in the 1860s who helped wipe out the last bands of free roaming Native Americans, and they named the town eventually after him. In McDermott, which is a interesting place because not only is it on the border of two states, but there is a rather large Paiute Shoshone reservation there, a very small town of farmers and ranchers. The town basically consists of a casino, two gas stations, a general store, and a collection of houses along with the high school, and some failing businesses, a public library branch. I mean, it is along Route 95 north of, or 93 rather, north of Winnemucca. When you drive north into Oregon, the only thing that tells you that you're coming into a population is you have to slow down to 35 miles an hour. I mean, there's no lights, there's nothing. And I contacted the coaches, and I wrote a story for the Review Journal in 2017, I think 2018, about this football team. And they were they in rural places, not just the West, but in also in other parts of the country, diminishing populations in small towns has driven a lot of coaches to go to eight-man football. And eight-man football is a different game entirely than 11-man football. So they form leagues where they play eight man against eight men. But this particular team was struggling to even recruit eight kids to play. So I wrote the story, and just in closing about this initial how I got into it, I liked the kids. The kids came and went. I didn't really talk to them that much, but I really liked the two coaches. To me, they were two fascinating individuals. And I really never played much organized sports in high school. I was on the golf team, and I played on my Christian youth organization basketball team. But I just got a kick out of calling one of the coaches, who was a Paiute Shoshone, a Shoshone Paiute, and calling, "Hey, coach, what's up? What's the season look like?" As a reporter, I work the phones for a story, and I just say, coach, one day I said, I think I want to come up and rent a house in town and write a whole, just be in town for the whole season and see what you go through, you and your co-coach Jack Smith. So they invited me up, and I spent an entire season in McDermott, and it was an eye opener, to say
Yeah,
the least.
yeah. And that was one of the aspects I enjoyed about the entire story is Coach Egan and Coach Smith. And I won't give away the ending, but Coach Egan has a truly remarkable come full circle life story in this book that encapsulates the entire book. But that was one of the things I learned when I was covering high school sports in San Diego. My own high school experience, I didn't have respect for high school coaches. When I look back on it, I think they failed me and they failed our school. And I didn't realize the importance of a high school coach until I was writing about athletes in San Diego and coaches like Dick Haynes and Herb Meyer and John Shacklet. They were legends. And I still remember only being a year or two out of college. And Vista High School was a dominant San Diego football power coached by Dick Haynes. And I was interviewing this kid and he was telling me his that Coach Haynes was like his father to him, and my jaw literally dropped because I had no frame of reference for that kind of story, and so I began to learn a lot and appreciate and write about the influence of high school coaches. And the other thing that's interesting about that is one time I was discussing it with the great Bill Walton, who was from San Diego,
Mm,
and he had played for a legendary coach at Helix High School, Gordon Nash, and
mm.
then of course he played for John Wooden at UCLA. And Bill told me he had the opposite experience. It wasn't until he got to the NBA that he realized a lot of guys played for lousy high school coaches. You did such a great job of bringing out the dedication of Coach Egan and Coach Smith. Talk about those two gentlemen.
Well, for a lot of kids, not only in rural America, but in urban America, kids call young men, and we're talking about, high school football. Young men come from all kinds of varied backgrounds, and especially down on the reservation and places, they don't always have a strong father figure in them. And for the first time, if you are a good coach and you realize your role, that what a father's figure do for us as young kids. They instill some discipline in our lives. They can show us what's right and wrong. They make us show up on time. They have us get up in the morning. And if you're living, say, on the Native American reservation and you don't have a father figure in your life, many young men, look to these coaches as there was a player on the McDermott Bulldogs who was a Native American player, and he was the running back, probably the most skilled kid on the team, who called both of the coaches dad. And it was meant as a joke, but there was one particular scene where he uh, came up during a practice and just embraced both coaches with a bear hug, and the other kids were looking on, and it wasn't out of the norm for him to do that. And I think to varying degrees, all these kids felt like either they appreciated it or they felt hounded because they weren't ready for that kind of discipline yet. But both these coaches were, as I say, I bonded more with the coaches than I did with the players, and I expected a lot of young players to see me as the cool uncle from the big city, and oh, tell us about stories about living where there's an Italian deli on your corner, and a lot of these kids from the res and a lot of these kids from ranching families just looked at me as just a plain outsider. And I was a lot older than them. I was older than both coaches. And it was hard for me to break into into their like that. I felt that they were comfortable talking with me. But the coaches, I mean, very briefly, I mean, both had their own backstories. Richard Egan, his great grandfather was Chief Egan, and one of the last roving tribal chiefs with a roving band of followers, along with Chief Winnemucca during the 1860s, to put up a stand during the Snake Wars when a lot of settlers were coming in and they were putting up fences and they were doing things, and they sent the military in to round them up on reservations. And during a battle, Chief Egan was killed, and he was actually more of a peacemaker. But the military didn't see peacemaker versus war maker. They saw color of skin, and if you were a particular color of skin, you were an enemy. He was killed, and after the battle, both he and his brother's heads were cut off and transported to Washington. This was an era of eugenics when the theory was that somehow the red man, the Native American, was not quite up to snuff with the white man, and they wanted to do experiments about measuring skull size. And for 100 years, Chief Egan's skull sat on a shelf in the Smithsonian, until the Smithsonian finally was doing a reckoning and reached out at the end of the 1990s to different tribes saying, "Hey, we got these skulls. Do you think they might be one of your relatives?" And they were Chief Egan's skull and his brother's skull were repatriated to southern Nevada, to southern Oregon, and Chief Egan with his sister were part of that repatriation. So the man's blood runs in this land, and it does, and he feels is proud to be a part of this region. he's Native American first. He's an American, I think, second. Those are not his words. Those are my observations. But his partner is a white guy named Jack Smith, and Jack grew up in Reno, Nevada, and his father was just the most colorful character I think I've ever come across. And doing nonfiction, his name was Mo Smith, and when he was a younger guy, he was a professional wrestler, and then he was a boxer, and then he was a boxing coach. So they hit him and Jack's mother and father divorced, and Jack went with his dad. So starting from the age of 8, Jack spent most of his time in the back seat of his father's car as they were driving to boxing matches. Mo was driving the next new Great White Hope out and putting him in the ring, or he was going to wrestling matches and wrestling with his crew. And this was like during the 1960s and 70s. And so Jack grew up as a real impressionable kid, became a boxer himself, amateur, and had a few pro fights. And Jack lives in the shadow, the legacy of his dad. He's become a damn good coach of both young women's sports and men's sports. But Mo's legacy looms large, and Jack, several times during our interviews, broke into tears that he feels he's not lived up to his father's expectations of him. So you have two men who are, in a sense, overshadowed by their pasts. And what they are, both good athletes, both played. Richard Egan, when he played football, he broke bones. And I talked to several people whose bones he broke, that still remember years later. And Jack knocked kids out, and he was also a good football player. And now here they are, coaches trying to instill that same kind of winning attitude to a generation of kids that have changed. I mean, they're softer, and they spend more time on the couch. They're gamers, and they come out, and the coaches sometimes scratch their heads that kids don't put in the effort that they put in. And so a lot of the tension in the book was the two coaches trying to to instill these boys, and they do, and they have their moments where they step up. But that's the tension in the book, and where the coaches have expectations, and the boys, in their own ways, try to meet them.
Yeah. And they both have these remarkable backgrounds, but they still had to be willing to embrace this role of a father figure. And that's something that I've always thought is twisted about our American sports society. We celebrate these pro coaches and college coaches making $10 million for pro sports and all the attention and glory. And these high school coaches are the ones that are really doing the groundwork, the dirty work for our society to develop kids. You saw a lot of that, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, Jack was the physical education instructor. He had an office in the school. Richard was the groundskeeper. He was the groundskeeper. He had a shed outside with a heater that he used in the winter. And so his job when he wasn't coaching was to make sure the grass grew on the football field. And he did a damn good job with it. So, it was very much of a thankless, very much of a thank he did not reap the rewards that he should have recently. And I'm trying to find out exactly what happened with the superintendent, but they are renaming the football field and in McDermott. And I wrote about this on I have a blog, which I wrote about it, but I don't know exactly. The decision was finally made. And so people were putting in, suggestions from the community. So the decision is being made 75 miles away in Winnemucca about this small community. And at last I checked, they were going to go with a coach that Richard played for, a white guy. And the community was saying Richard has been around for years. He's played here. This is predominantly a Native American team in a predominantly Native American community. And you're going to name the sports field after a white guy who coached here 50 years ago, when Richard's still coaching and still giving up and still going out every year trying to get players. And so to me, and even the superintendent acknowledged to me that, I know how it looks. I know how it looks to the community, and I'm not sure exactly. So yeah, it's a thankless job.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, another big aspect of your book is you talk about settling the West, the genocide of the Indian tribes, and even the tribes fighting against each other, which was part of Chief Egan's fate. And I kept it kept bringing me back to our own country today in modern times where we're so divisive and we're almost turning backwards. Uh, and we're divisive where we had black people questioning whether Kamala Harris was qualified to be president, and they had to learn more about her. You didn't know enough about her or Trump to go ahead and not vote for her. It just baffles my mind. But I imagine you saw a lot of the correlations between the past and now too.
Well, I tried. I knew I was in red America when I drove into town. I knew I was in flyover country. The first day that I drove into town, way outside the gas station, I was meeting the team for the first time. They hadn't started to practice yet. It was in early August, and the only real place to meet was there was a metal picnic table outside the gas station. We all met there. And as I was the first to arrive, and I looked and I just saw a huge Trump banner on the side of a window, and I knew where I was, and I tried to, not come. I try not to observe those political lines, and for example, Jack and my landlord Junior, and his wife Lorraine. I don't think it's much of a, but Junior kept telling me that my mind would be totally altered, that my whole perspective on the world would change if I just went on this website that he was sending me. Jack would talk to me about his political views, and I listened. I really did. I listened, and I wasn't trying to proselytize. And as a reporter, I knew I had a job to do, and I didn't want to start up political arguments. But I have made some of the best friends that I have made as a journalist in this small town, despite these political differences. So I went into enemy territory, if you want to call that, what's considered enemy territory today. I mean, I live in San Francisco. We are as liberal as they come. And I went in there, and I see in this day and age where people are saying, why can't we all get along, or can we have a conversation? I realize that you really can have a conversation. You just need to listen to people, and if people can talk more than just sound bites from Fox News or sound bites from PBS, and listen to their specific lives and what they deal with, then you could at least have an understanding. No one's going to change each other's mind, but I can, like, I have very diehard conservative friends in McDermott, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good summary. Well, I don't want to give away the ending, but how
Well,
did you?
I don't know, Tom. It's like I don't think there's any, it's not like there's a, and if you don't mind, I mean, I don't mind giving away
Well,
the.
that's up to you. I wasn't
I
sure of the
mean,
ending until I got to it. But
yeah.
how did you cope with not knowing how it was going to end? Just the unfolding story.
Well, I was there a month prior to the opening, pretty much 3 weeks prior to the first scheduled game. And this was a school that over the previous 3 years had not had enough kids to have a season. So they were put on probation. And what the district said, until you can guarantee a running track record, we're not going to schedule for a whole eight game schedule, because if you don't have enough kids, then all these other teams are going to have these weeks where you were supposed to play them, and they're teams that do play and want to play. So they were only looking at a 4 game season in any event. And to me, it added some drama to the book, whether they would have a season or not, and whether the coaches could get these kids in shape with the right attitude. A lot of the kids had played before. I mean, during one of the dramas in the book was this freshman who showed hope as a wide receiver, but wasn't sure he did. I don't think he liked being hit. And he would come and he would not come. At one point, the early part of the book, Coach Egan has hope that a girl, 17-year-old girl, was not going to play volleyball that year. She's going to come up for the football team. And it's not so surprising on the reservation, because these girls are tough. They roughhouse with their boys. They ride horses. they're out there doing their so a young girl probably what would give up some pounds to some of these other kids, especially if they're playing teams with you got kids are going to play go on to play Division I football. But so I thought, wow, what a great kind of narrative device that would have been. How these boys would have defended a girl on their team and how they would have accepted. So she ended up not coming out, and in the end, they ended up not having a team. And it's a very poignant part of the book where they decide that everything they've done, they can't, it's not going to happen. And I remember calling my editor at the University of Nebraska Press after that day in the locker room where they just decided they couldn't do it. And I said, they're not having a season this year, but I still have a book because I had spent a lot of time in McDermott and the characters had risen to the level that I had gone in thinking this was a book about a high school football team with the town as the secondary character, the town as a stage. What I really had is a book about a town with a high school football team as a supporting character to show what was going on in the town. And there's a difference there. And so there were a lot of characters that had nothing to do with football that are predominant characters in my book. And many reviewers who have looked at my book for podcasts and reviews have said this really isn't a book about football. And I would say is our sports books really all about sports? They're not. They're about human nature. And so, the book it's called No Friday Night Lights, which is a play off Buzz Bissinger's book, Friday Night Lights, which is about high school football at its probably most, cynical, pornographic obsession where they become almost professional enterprises trying to win-win. This is completely the other side. There are no Friday Night Lights in McDermott, Nevada. It's a cow pasture with wild horses, that walk along the outskirts of the field. And on the cover of the book, you see a young man there, and you look in the behind him on the other side of the goalpost, and there's nothingness out there.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll repeat, you can't get in a more American story than Coach Egan, and then learning about his bloodlines all the way back to Chief Egan. That's America right there. Yeah, I was going to point out that I thought one of the reviews trying to compare your book to Buzz Bissinger's Friday Night Lights missed the point because it's actually the opposite story. And the other thing, Bissinger could lean on a winning team and winning culture, and that was an easier story to tell. And you did such a good job of talking about how maybe that's why that book was a bestseller, and this is a tougher sell because Americans only want to hear about winners. And then the other thing that book had, it was able to play off the stereotype of Booby Miles being a black kid with no education and hurting his knee, and a lot of Americans are going to gobble that up. Yeah, just talk about the challenges you met that are different from that book. And
Well, look, if you can indulge me, I'd like to start off reading just a little bit out of the second chapter where we're talking about exactly what we're discussing. And someone who picks up this book might say, to themselves, well, for example, Friday Night Lights, it's easy to write about winners, and because there's all the drama that is there with kids, and when you're playing, you're trying to get to the championship. The stakes are much higher than if your goal is to have a team. And I wanted to explain to readers and I'll be very short here a bit with this, but I start off with the second chapter of the book saying, as everybody knows, America loves winners. They relish in those rumbles of joy at center court and the beer showers in the victors' locker rooms. Most sports journalism celebrates winners, teams who overcome drugs, alcohol, and abuse to win games. A reporter captures that champion season and all those hurdles overcome to create a feel-good narrative, as if dissecting a winner's mindset reveals something about the human condition and how we manage to find victory at any cost. That storyline falls flat with me. I'm more drawn to the misfits of this world, the outcast and barflies, underdogs who stay under. As a journalist, I've sought out the vanquished, those who fail, because that's where I find the most compelling stories, in places without oversized egos or prolonged man hugs. One last paragraph I'll read. In the losing locker room, athletes sit on benches with their heads bowed. They punch lockers, speak difficult truths. No true philosopher ever hoisted a winner's trophy, I believe, because the lessons in losing don't occur to winners. Losing says more about our collective experience than winning ever could. We mark our lives by our losses. We learn from them. Winning is an illusory, temporary situation at best. Losing is what happens to people most of the time. And Tom, I'm not calling you and I a couple of losers, but we've known each other for a long time, and we've licked our wounds over beers and traded things that should have went that way and could have went that way. And every once in a while, we punch above our weight. And I think for the most part, we're no different than any other guy or woman out there. And these kids, the difficulty would be writing is trying to characterize a bunch of young high school kids to call them losers because it's pejorative and they're not losers. And that's one thing that the coaches try to instill. You may lose. At one spring season, this team was outscored 392-2. They lost big time, but they weren't losers. They showed up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great summary. And yeah, let's commiserate a little bit about selling books. There's no, as I said earlier, there's no book that explains college football integration in the 1960s as accurately as mine. In fact, I've got two books on it, Ray of Light and The Right Thing to Do. I debunk all the Bear Bryant myths because these Bear Bryant myths stand in the way of my story being properly told. Because the national media, for whatever reason, has been duped by Bear Bryant hagiography. Anyone who reads my book, for the podcasts I've done and the people I've talked to, they're stunned to learn how little they knew about Duffy Daugherty, Michigan State coach, as a singular individual in the 1960s. And this includes Michigan State people that don't understand the story and are they tell me how surprised they are and so proud they are of their university when they learned what happened. But I can't punch through to ESPN, The Athletic, Sports Illustrated. They all stick with the simple story about Bear Bryant. And then you're in a similar situation here. You got a great story. It's different than anything else, but people want a winner, not a loser. I guess you're better at articulating these things than me. We just keep plugging away or what?
We have no choice. My wife is from China, and last year or 2 years ago, when I was working on my book, we were having dinner with some of her scholastic schoolmates, and I know enough Mandarin to have followed this conversation. And one of the men she went to like fourth grade with said, "Oh, your husband's a writer. What's he doing?" She said, "He's writing a book." And he said, "What it's about?" It's so boring. I don't even know what the topic is. And my wife is a really tough sell, but there are other tough sells out there. When I had a friend of mine, a very good journalist who recently wrote a book about covering the first Trump White House, and he wasn't a Trump bashing book. He was like, "Oh, here's what it's like to cover the White House," and particularly when Donald Trump was there for the first 4 years. So when people will make a connection, wow, Trump, oh, this, I want to hear about something about this. What I come up with is like, well, let me take you to rural America, and let me take you to a small football team, that with a losing track record and how they struggle and how coaches struggle to help them become men and look beyond the losing for winning. It's a harder sell, and people. One woman, when I was at a book table, she said, "It sounds interesting. I just don't read anymore."
Yeah.
That aspect, you're up against, you're up against it out there in the world. It's a pretty it's a pretty crowded, the average reader's attention. There's a lot to read out there, social media, magazines that get thrown on your doorstep. You're reading books. I mean, I think you and I are from a generation that I insist on having a book that I'm reading. I mean, right now I'm reading a book about Giuseppe Garibaldi. For another book I'm reading about writing about Italy. And when I get into bed at night and I do some reading, I make sure that I go to the printed page. Um, and I think that we could be a dying breed that and I think for your reader, if your listeners, do you know how many writers actually have it's less than 1% are sort of treated like kings by their publishers and
Yeah.
given big and I'm saying 1%. It could be more, but a very, very, very small. It's like going out onto the basketball court after high school and after school one day and hitting a couple jump shots saying, I'm going to play in the NBA. You know what the percentage of kids who show amount of
Yeah.
make the NBA? But so what do the other kids do? Do they, if you don't play in the NBA, do you not play basketball just because you can't rise to what the culture says is the highest, performance level? You do it because you love it. And I know you for a fact, Tom, that this is been a passion for yours for years, covering the sports and the characters, the story behind the final score. And mine has always been to find quirky characters and to find stories to tell, as I say, somewhere out there. And so what do? You have to continue doing it. And there was I spoke at a book conference in Las Vegas a couple of years ago, and a woman raised her hand. She said, "I can't get the big time publishing houses. I can't even get an agent. I can't get the big publishing houses to pay any attention to me. What are your suggestions?" And I said, "Forget about them. In this day and age, self-publishing has taken on a completely new identity. It used to be that if you self-publish your books, you were kind of a loser, and you couldn't get the publishing houses to come in. Nowadays, people come out and they publish their own books and they get a following and they sell as many books or more as say, somebody like me who has a quote unquote legitimate university press, but they're out there. They're not letting the roadblocks get in their way. And I encouraged her to go out and do your thing, no matter what way you can. If you go out and publish your own book and get it on Amazon, which is very easy to do, you're right there next to the bestseller. I mean, in fact, I love when I call up my book on Amazon and it's right there next to Friday Night Lights. It's Friday Night Lights and no Friday Night Lights. And Buzz Bissinger had a TV movie made about his, a series, and he had great success. His book was heralded, and mine has reached its audience, but certainly not the size of Bissinger's audience. And I feel your pain about having an argument where no one's listening to you. And all I can say, Tom, is to keep at it.
Yeah.
And you keep at it and you keep writing about what you're passionate about. And I'm going to do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And I read something that helps me cope with it too, that people will stick with what they're familiar with, even if they know it's not true anymore. They
Yeah.
still want to celebrate Bear Bryant, even though it's not a true story. And it's at the expense of the true pioneers in the 1960s. Well, let's wrap this up. I should say with pride that I've attracted the interest of a documentary team and we're in pre-development
Congratulations.
on my book.
You are making headways.
Yeah. So anybody out there with deep pockets that wants to fund a couple of documentaries, contact me. Mine and John's story. But John and I are going to be, I'm pressuring John to join me. I'm going to be at the Los Angeles Times Book Festival on the USC campus, April 26th and 27th. And John is a lot better carnival barker than me, so I'm hoping he'll join me. And we'll both sell a lot of books there. And that is April 26th, 27th, the USC campus, Los Angeles Times Book Festival. My website, tomshanahan.report, and also my books are on Amazon. John, your final comments.
Wild horses couldn't keep me away from being there, Tom. And I'd love to be there to see you. And this will be my first, if it works out, with my first trip to the Los Angeles Times Book Festival. I used to work for the Los Angeles Times, and it'll be great to see some old friends. But my website is johnglionna.com, JohnGlionna.com. And if any of you end up, or you're from Southern California or end up, please come by and say hello to Tom and I.
All right. Well, thanks for watching the End Game, episode 31. Please share it with as many friends as you have, and we'll look for you on April 26th and 27th.
Stick to the back roads, guys.